How have you made a rude person's day worse? Story 1. Being a cop in a small town, I would get a few large parties, 150 plus kids, with a lot of kids coming from outlying areas. I'm generally pretty nice to the young adults who live in the area I police and am generally well liked. But to the kids who come from different towns to party, well, they obviously don't know or like me. Anyhow, this one party I pull up and start walking around, turning a little bit of a blind eye to the underage drinking. I talk to the homeowner's son, parents away, and just ask him to try and get rid of some people and move the party indoors and close the windows as there have been too many neighbor complaints. He says he'll do what he can. All nice and cordial. Anyhow, this one punk standing there with a Lucky beer in his hand starts mouthing me off and bragging to his buddies. Just average junk like, "Hey pig, eat any donuts yet?" And just generally swearing and saying how I don't do junk about how I can't do junk about what he's saying, and that I can't arrest him for dip as he's on private property. Dip, drunk in public place. I don't give him any satisfaction or acknowledgement. I have thick skin, else I wouldn't be a cop. But I had other calls to attend to, so I left. No further complaints from the party, as the homeowner asked many people to leave. A few hours later, I'm driving back to the office, donut-free, and pull over a car doing 15 kilometers an hour over the limit on the highway. Usually I give cars at least 20 kilometers per hour on the highway before pulling them over, as well that's what I normally do on the highway, and wouldn't be right to give people tickets for something I do all the time. Well, it's the jerkwad driving who's been mouthing me off. Amazing how nice he was to me at this point in time. Complete attitude change. I didn't let him know that I remembered him from the party, and I now had his name and vehicle plate so I could always look out for him in the future. Long story short, he got tickets for speeding, only having one active headlight, failure to display an N sign, new driver law here, and on the rear of the vehicle lets other drivers know this person just got his license. Having more than one non-family member passenger, another new driver law, and not wearing a seatbelt. As I remembered him drinking, I also demanded a roadside breathalyzer test. He wasn't drunk, but had some alcohol in his system. So I also gave him a 24-hour roadside probation from driving and towed his vehicle. I slept well that night. Also, 3 months later, after running his license on our system, the insurance company had prohibited him from driving for 3 months. Just karma. As much as a lot of people don't trust the cops, this one seems like he's got his head on straight and knows his community well. Just amazing what happens. Just amazing. Glad this one came through the way it did. Story 2. I was sitting in my car taking some photos with my new smartphone while using different settings. Then there was this woman who just stopped at a one-way street with only one lane. She stands there for like 10 seconds doing nothing, and I thought that was very unusual, so I started to make a video. Another driver comes and honks. She then proceeds to reverse and hit the car of the other guy with her big BMW. 4 guys jumped out of the BMW and started yelling at the guy. You have to know, in Germany, the one who hits another car from behind will always be blamed if he can't prove that it wasn't his fault. So we have a classic insurance fraud. The poor guy at the back was really worried because he knew he couldn't prove it. I just sat there in my car and waited for the police. Then I went outside and the police started to get the stories. Of course, there were 4 against 1 guy. I just stood there and listened to the woman complaining about how this idiot hit her from behind and her brand new car is now damaged. After the police took the statement from both sides and even took my statement, they said there is no chance that 2 versus 4 could prove that he didn't do it. 2 of the guys at the BMW said they didn't know the girl and were pedestrians who saw it. That would increase the credibility. So they made all false statements to the police, and exactly that's the thing I wanted to happen. I then told the police, "Oh wait, there's There's just one thing, like Columbo style, and said that I got a video of what happened. I showed them to the police, and the woman and the drivers just stood there with their mouths open. You could not only see how she hit his car, but also that the pedestrians were with the woman in the car. Then the guy hugged me and we became good friends. Turns out he lives near me and we spend the evening drinking and gaming. Sorry for my bad English and German. Beautiful. Man, that is amazing. Always have a dash cam. Always get a dash cam because many people are trying to run something. And two, it was great for him to just sit there and listen to these people act and lie their faces off and then just spring this thing on them. Amazing. Story 3. I'm a manager at a grocery store, so I get awesomely rude customers on a daily basis. Every Wednesday is senior discount day. You have to be 55 to 60 to qualify for the discount. Needless to say, Wednesdays are intense. Lots of seniors and lots of other people who don't want to deal with the seniors. I don't generally mind the old folks. Most of them are pretty cool and have some interesting stories and cute jokes. This Wednesday, there was one particular customer who was being a huge pain in the butt from the moment she walked in. She was tall, blonde, high heels, very made up, and dressed to the nines. She was probably late 30s to early 40s. She came storming up to customer service. "There are no parking spots. This is ridiculous. I'm going to request that you expand your parking lot since you don't seem to have the initiative to request that yourself." Off to a great start, lady. She comes back storming back up about 45 minutes later. "I'm in a huge hurry, and every line has someone in it. I need to check out here." We had 3 lines open, and each one had one single customer. One. I say, "No problem, but I'll get you at a checkout. We have too many items to get here." She has a huge hissy fit. "I don't have time for this. Let's go." As I'm checking her out, it is constant whining. "You have only one brand of makeup? That's ridiculous. I only wear MAC, but I was going to settle for Revlon, but you don't even have that. Now I have to make a whole separate trip. Please don't put my bread on top of my eggs. The eggs could roll over and crush the bread. Please bag my avocados separately. I need to use those for a face mask tonight. They need to be perfect. I have a photo session for work tomorrow. I'm in a magazine." She was unbelievable. Finally, at the end, I had enough. As she's about to pay, I say, "Don't forget, today is senior discount day. You got 5% off." She just stared at me. "What?" I smiled broadly. "Every Wednesday, senior citizens get 5% off their bill. I'll go ahead and take it off. You are 55 to 60, right?" She's staring at me, debit card in hand, cheeks getting red. I lose my smile slowly and say, "Oh, you don't qualify? Sorry about that. Maybe next year. Thanks for your honesty." I haven't seen her in the store since. Just amazing. That's thinking on your feet. I mean, apparently he saw the chink in the armor and just went for it and just hit the bullseye. Just hit the target straight on. Amazing. Story 4. I was working as a shift leader in a Dunkin' Donuts. Spent 2 years in that hellhole and dealt with my fair share of rude buttholes. One particularly memorable day, a group of ladies came in during our busiest hour, just past noon. The line was almost out the door and we were short-staffed, so it was pretty hectic. While they were ordering, one of them asked for a job application and started filling it out on the counter. She handed it back before they were done ordering, and I stashed it on a shelf under the register and started making their food. They had a huge order, and we did our best to get it out quickly, but it was obvious from the looks on their faces that we just weren't quick enough for their liking. They sat down to eat their food, and the girl who just turned in her application got back in line. I spotted her right away. She was standing with a glaring face, crossing her arms and tapping her foot, trying her best to look obviously, almost cartoonishly ticked off. So I motioned for her to come up to the counter since I knew she had a complaint and I wanted to get it fixed right away. I assumed that in the shuffle, We had messed up her sandwich or something like that. Anyone who's worked in fast food knows that these things happen when it's chaotic. I asked her what was wrong, and she pointed to her bottled Mountain Dew and barked, definitely not an indoor voice, "This is flat!" It was a bit accusing, as though it were my fault that the bottle of soda she just opened was flat. So I took it and told her to get another one out of the cooler, then check it to make sure it was good. After all that, she asked for a refund. I said, as politely as I could, "Ma'am, I replaced your soda. Sorry if there was an inconvenience, but I don't think a refund should be necessary." Something like that, I don't remember my exact words. So she stormed, ticked off, back to her table, and started complaining loudly to her group about not getting a refund. So, since I was having an awful day anyway and really could not see a shrew like this ever working for us, I grabbed her application from the register, walked it over to the lobby trash can nearest her table, crumpled it up, and threw it away as she watched. The look on her face was freaking priceless. Too long didn't read? Lady comes in to order food and fill out a job application, is a total shrew. I throw the application in the trash while she watches. Story 5. Well, this sounds kind of terrible now that I think about it, but I don't think anybody's going to see this anyway, so I might as well. A few months ago, I drove to my parents' house pretty late in the day. After leaving, I noticed a dog had been hit and was lying in the middle of the road. So I parked my car and put on the emergency lights, with my headlights clearly illuminating the dog. I put on a pair of gloves. I'm an EMT. I always have a box of gloves in my car, not only because it's always a good idea to have a pair just in case, but because I often do this with animals that have been hit out of respect, so I can move it to the side of the road where it wouldn't be hit anymore. When I finally made it up to the dog, it had lifted its head and was breathing normally. Turns out the car had only hit and broken the dog's back legs. The dog was fully responsive and didn't seem to have lost a lot of blood. Thinking this meant that the dog had a chance of living, I went to spread out a couple plastic bags in the back seat of my car. As I was doing this, I noticed a car speeding down the road. I had rushed to the side of the road, directing the car to move to the opposite side to avoid hitting the obviously visible dog lying in the road. Instead, though, the driver ran right over the dog, right in front of me. Now, as an EMT, I've seen some pretty intense things, but I'm always just there for the aftermath. I was pretty freaked out to have watched this dog be brutally run over by a speeding car. I just stood there, motionless, staring at the dog's remains. However, I noticed that the car pulled into a house only a couple houses down from my parents. Being blinded by a mixture of rage, shock, and disgust, I decided this dog needed a proper burial. It was about 1 a.m. by this point, so I went into my parents' backyard and grabbed a shovel and a wheelbarrow. I lifted the dog's body. It was still intact. The car was moving so fast it basically just squeezed out its insides into the wheelbarrow and wheeled it to the driver's house, where I started to dig a 3-foot deep hole and lowered the dog's body inside and proceeded to bury it. I placed a large stone on top of the hole and left a note on the driver's door. The note said, "Hey, I'm sure you feel pretty bad about unaliving that dog last night, so I'm sure you won't mind that I buried it in your front yard." It's what she would have wanted. It was about 3 a.m. when I finally finished everything, and I left home feeling nothing but defeat afterward. Too long didn't read? Some guy unalived a dog that I was trying to save, so I buried it in his front yard. Story 6. My wife and I were on the receiving end of someone's justice. We'd gone out to a local sports bar/restaurant for dinner on a Saturday night. Unfortunately, the local football team had just started playing and the place was packed. While we were waiting in line, we heard the conversation between the folks in front of us with the hostess. Hostess: "How many?" Guest: "8. Hostess: "All right, we have you down. We're not quoting wait times right now as the game has just started and we have no idea how long many of the diners will be staying." Guest: "So you're telling me you won't seat us?" It went back and forth for a few minutes, with the guest getting more and more indignant and the hostess trying to explain that they'd seat them as soon as possible. They just didn't know when that would be. And with a large party, the limited number of big top tables would make it worse, and the group was unwilling to split up into 2 groups. The guest finally moves, and it's our turn. We say there's just the 2 of us, and the hostess starts in on the "we can't quote times." My wife says, Don't worry, we heard what you said to the last person. We're not in any hurry, and we know how busy you are right now. We get our blinky alert box and find a spot to wait. We're expecting a solid 45 minutes. Literally 2 minutes later, our box starts buzzing. We'd been bumped to the front and were being seated. The best part is that when we got to our table, there was another empty table right next to it. The 2 tables could have sat in a group of 8, but the hostess and waitresses made sure not to seat them. Oh, and the wings were delicious. The wings were delicious because they were seasoned with sweet, sweet vengeance. Again, karma. Be nice to the people serving you food and seating you, they'll be nice to you, usually. I know there are exceptions, but I'm sure that the hostess and the waitresses wanted to deal with the nice couple than this jerkwad group of 8. Story 7. I used to work for the Department of Motor Vehicles, and the one I worked at had pretty limited parking. Surprise! I had left for lunch, came back, and was having a hard time finding a place to park. I finally found a spot, so I drove up to it and put my signal on showing that I was waiting for it. People, in my experience, usually respect this and continue on. Not this time. Just as the car was backing out, after I had waited a few minutes, a car came from the opposite side of the lot, made eye contact with me, and then shot right into the parking space. I was so mad because now I would be late after looking for a new spot. As I drove past the woman that had taken the spot, I just shook my head, and she responded by shrugging her shoulders, smiling, mouthing the words, "Oh well," to me, and then ran her finger from her eye down her cheek as if to mock me, crying about it. I continued into work, got in trouble for being late, but had actually forgotten about the incident until whose number got called to my station but Ms. Spot Stealer herself. The look on her face was priceless. Keep in mind that I'm not your average DMV worker. I understand that stuff happens and waive penalties all the time and treat my customers with respect because I believe that what goes around comes around, and I know how awful it is to wait at the DMV all day. I'm usually so nice about getting penalties taken off of people's accounts that I get in trouble for it at times. So I greet Spot Stealer as nice as I would anyone else. In fact, it may have been nicer than I normally would be. She may have thought I didn't recognize her. Her registration was far past due, with hundreds due in penalties. I let her tell me her whole sob story, then finally tell her that she owes in full because she was aware of her due date. She argues it a little until, out of sight from my manager, I mouth the words, "Oh well," and drag my finger from my eye to my cheek, mocking her tears. At that point, she puts her head down and proceeds to take out her card and pay the full amount because, yes, we do take debit cards. What goes around comes around. Story 8. Too long didn't read. I provided unsolicited marriage counseling services to a jerkwad. I worked at a hotel several years ago and had to deal with insufferable jerks about a dozen times a day. Hotel stories about Billy Mays watching Granny Corn, a person that threw hot coffee in my face, a person that spit on me, and a crazy lady that slapped me are in my comment history. But the best, most evil revenge I ever got was on a guy that stayed with us 4 days a week for the entire 5 years I worked at the hotel. The big utility company in our area was having financial issues, and he was the leader of the auditing team that was sent in to straighten it out. Anyway, I would interact with the guy at least a few times every day I worked, and he was always very rude and condescending. As an example, one of his coworkers would ask me for a local restaurant recommendation, and he would chime in with, "Yeah, because minimum wage workers are known for their taste in fine dining." If someone asked me something personal, he would say something like, "Ask him what life choices he made to be here, plunging toilets and writing down my preferred wake-up call time. Maybe he can share his wisdom so we all avoid his fate." Stuff like that. He was just a jerkwad to everyone on the hotel staff and was always very demanding. Since I saw him every day, I noticed that he had developed a relationship with one of the younger women on his auditing team. I saw their romance blossom from flirting to full-on groping and grinding in the hotel lobby. One day, he had just finished delivering one of his delightfully awful bon mots to me, and I was fuming. Then he screamed at one of my coworkers because she had a Filipino accent and he said he only wanted his room cleaned by white Americans. I vowed revenge. His wife called in to speak to him later that night, like she usually did, and I said, "Oh, I think he's sleeping in Ms. X's room tonight. One moment, please." And then I connected his wife to her room. His wife must not have told him what I had said because he didn't try to get me fired. They got a divorce. They didn't have kids, but according to another guy on the auditing team, his wife got the house and custody of their dog. He stopped staying with us shortly after the phone call. Story 9. I work at a bar, and for the past several weeks, I have been dealing with a regular guy who just hits on me all the time in the sleaziest way possible, trying to look down my shirt, touching the small of my back. He even called me his girlfriend to a coworker. I've told him countless times that I'm not interested and that I actually found his advances inappropriate and incredibly rude. Of course, this doesn't stop him. Advance to today. I had the day off and decided it would be fun to visit work and have a few free drinks while watching the election progress. So I brought my boyfriend to the bar and sat down on a stool, and lo and behold, this guy came up. He ignores my boyfriend and puts his hand on the small of my back again and says, "Hey you, I have a booth if you want to put your hands to work." He looks at me and grins a sleazy smile. "Oh yeah, I knew you wanted it all along. You got nice hands, baby." I had no idea what he was talking about since I wasn't holding his hand. He then looks at his hands at my lower back and his face goes pale. He isn't holding my hands, but my boyfriend's, who snuck his hand to hold his and made this jerk think that I was holding his. My boyfriend then looks at the guy and starts talking in the most feminine voice. "You know it, baby. Now where's this booth?" He then kissed the guy's hand. The guy's face? Priceless. He let go of my boyfriend's hand and ran out of the bar. My coworker was standing there looking at everything and started cracking up. It was the best. "I like your boyfriend's style. So good. Hold his hand for me." Sure, we all love to be able to stand up for our significant other in case some sort of confrontation or unwanted advances come along. This was the most creative I think I've seen. I think it was great that he was able to do this without the kind of standard bravado, let's take this outside kind of resolution. Story 10. A few years back, after having gone shopping, I was queued in traffic waiting to get out of the car park. A few cars ahead of us, there was this awful old bomb of a car with 4 teenagers in it. Fairly douchey-looking dudes, shirts off, board shorts, and sunglasses on. We were nowhere near a beach. Anyway, these 4 teenagers had a megaphone with them in their car and thought that it would be hilarious to shout profanities at other cars and people in the car park area while we all waited to leave. This center employee drives by in one of those tractors with a trailer attached for transporting shopping carts, and the guys in the car start shouting junk at him through the megaphone. "Why don't you get a real job, you freaking loser?" and so forth. The employee just put his head down as he drove by with that "okay" expression on his face. Next, the 4 teenagers decide it would be funny to start shouting profanities at some guy in a massive off-road 4x4 with a bull bar on the front. Bad move. I can't remember what they said, but the 4x4 guy wasn't having any of it. He calmly drove his car out of the queue and got about 25 meters away perpendicular to the teenager's awful car. Then he hit the gas and T-bones their awful car into the wall. He then calmly backs up a little and then takes his turn to exit the car park and goes on his merry way. The employee transporting the shopping carts nearly fell off his tractor with laughter. His laughter was in ladder goat territory.
Please like and subscribe if you made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
Story 11. I work in a local theater, and we have a lot of rude, awful women who are part of local ballet schools come through our venue who are the mothers of the dancers. Once, this woman rang up wanting seats to an almost sold-out ballet performance that had been on sale for 4 months the day before the show, and did nothing but abuse me for 5 minutes because she left buying them too late. Whined about how she shouldn't have to pay to for her kids, whined that we should get a bigger venue, it seats just under 500. then put me on hold while she rang 3 of her relatives to see if they wanted seats too. She was positively awful. The seats I was about to sell her were the only ones in the theater left, and they were good seats. While I'm on hold, a grandmother of one of the ballerinas comes to the desk and asks if we have any seats left, as she's been in hospital and couldn't buy them earlier, but said she'd understand if we were booked out. I put the phone with the on-hold music down and sold this old lady the last seats for the show, and gave her an invite to our next year's dance season for her granddaughter and herself, so she'd know exactly when all the important dates were coming. She thanked me over and over, and she's now one of our regulars and brings her grandkids to our shows. 2 minutes after the old lady leaves, the shrew on the other end finally takes me off hold and says she wants the remaining seats that we have left. I tell her, sorry, we've just sold out while you had me on hold, I'm afraid. Better luck next year. Anything else I can help you with? She was choking with rage on the other end of the phone. It was fantastic. I really like this one. You're not actually doing anything mean. Story 12. Abstract. Woman and daughter talking junk behind my back in another language that I happen to speak. I used to work for a major bank, and while doing my stint there, I came across a ton of buttholes. I was taking a deposit for a lady and her daughter, and I heard them speaking a Middle Eastern language. At first, I wasn't paying attention, but when I realized they were speaking Farsi, I was all ears. Reason? I speak Farsi. They were talking about how much of a loser I was, how this job as a teller was the only thing I had in my life, that I probably didn't have a girlfriend and didn't attend school. Throughout this conversation, I spoke only English to her, and every time she responded to my requests, she would smile and then say something nasty about me in Farsi. At the end of the conversation, I switched up the language and said, just because I work at a bank doesn't give you the right to say things about me behind my back. I'm in grad school to become a psychotherapist, and this job is for spending money. This isn't how Persian people behave, and you should be ashamed. Is there anything else I can help you with? Her daughter snapped and left the building, and her mother was beaten red, embarrassed, apologizing profusely, and left. I never saw either of them again. Story 13. I was working as a manager in a big nightclub about a year ago. I don't wear a uniform, but have a radio and run the security team. The venue has a great smoking section that looks out onto the street. One night, the venue was packed, so I did my usual roam, making sure that there were no problems. However, it was too packed to walk through the smoking section, so I walked down the street instead, but could still very easily see into the smoking section. One guy stares me down, then calls me over and starts swearing at me for no reason and telling me that pieces of junk like you could never get into a venue like this. He obviously had no idea I was the manager. However, I didn't want to have security get into a fight inside with him. The guy kept telling me he would punch me out, etc., and was clearly trying to look macho to impress someone. So I agreed and told him to come meet me outside, and he could even have a free swing. He puts his drink down, takes off his jacket, and storms outside. Once he walked outside, I walked back inside and told security not to let him back in. The look on his face when he realized I ran the place was priceless. And then the realization that he couldn't get back into the club was amazing. It was the easiest and most fun removal I've ever done. Russell Crowe is such a weird guy. Story 14. I'm in a massive line at a store. I'm next in line, but the person in front of me has a buttload of stuff. A helpful clerk sees the mess and opens another aisle saying, I can help the next customer. Well, that's me. However, the checkout counter has 2 sides, a right and a left. It's set up for people to come to the right side, but the left can be used as well. As I'm stepping over to her counter, this butthole from the very end of my line is sprinting to her counter, pushing people with his partner in tow. He arrives right before me. They have a mountain of items in their cart, which he starts throwing on the checkout counter. I'm standing there on the other side with my one item burning with rage. Checkout girl waits until he stacks all of his junk on the counter, looks at me, looks at him, and says to him, I'm sorry, sir, you're on the wrong side. You'll have to go to the end of the line, which is now massive. I put on my biggest grin, made eye contact with him as long as possible, and loudly told the clerk how awesome she was. Story 15. Was in the theater quite a few years back. Some action flick, I think Jean-Claude Van Damme, and there were two 16-year-old or so kids in front of me who were in turn behind a group of smaller kids. Say 12 or so. I was alone. The wife hates action movies. I quickly noticed that the two older kids were freaking with the younger ones, kicking their seat backs, throwing popcorn at them, flicking spit at them, the works. The theater was crowded, so the little guys couldn't move. Finally, one of the douche teens leaned forward and I think flicked one of the kids' ears. When the little kid turned around to glare, flicking douche teen says, "You got a problem with that jerkwad?" His friend guffaws. When the Glockmeister sits back, I haul off and give him a decent slap upside the head, knocking his noggin into his friend's. They both turn and half jump out of their seats, and then pause when they see me. I'm 6'2", 225 pounds. I stood up and said, "You got a problem with that jerkwads?" They looked at each other and then turned to sit back down. I said. "You sit there, and I'm going to make you as miserable as you've been making these guys in front of you." They shuffled on out of the theater. The younger kids all turned to me and said, "Thank you, sir." Too long didn't read? Jerk slapped some teen bullies, became action hero. Story 16. Just the other day I was at a Chinese buffet, and the three people in the booth next to me were questioning the waitress. She appeared to be Asian Hispanic about voting for the president and who she planned to vote for. She had trouble understanding them and communicating that she could not vote. They immediately began taunting her that she shouldn't be here if she couldn't vote, that she didn't even know who the president of the United States is, and then took a picture and said they would post it on Facebook. I later found out the waitress was on a school visa and couldn't vote, but was unable to convey that to them. After the waitress walked off, one of the girls at the table, the one who took the pic, looked up and asked me where I worked because I looked familiar. When I replied to the local university in the social work department, she commented that she had recently been in my office to apply to our program, to which I replied, "Yes, I remember you, and I'm also on the admissions committee," followed with a wink. The color drained from her face and she knew she was boned. Karma is a shrew. Story 17. I was riding my bike to work one day, and when crossing a street in the legal zone with a walk sign, a woman ran me over. She drove through the crosswalk looking to turn right and ran right into me. She stopped after I got bumped hard enough by her fender to take a spill and have some bruising all down my side. She gave me an exasperated, "my bad" wave and continued to talk on her cell phone, ignoring me as I picked myself and my bike up. I walked right up to her open window, grabbed her cell phone from her ear, and chucked it into a nearby parking lot as hard as I could. I swear that was the farthest I have thrown anything in my life. She gaped at me in shock as I struggled back onto my bike and slowly rode off, fuming, yet victorious. Then, a half-mile farther on my trek, I got attacked by a goose. Not my best day. Too long didn't read? A woman hit me with her car, got revenge, and got attacked by a goose. Those who feel that riding a bike in a crosswalk is not legal are correct. In this particular instance, it was not a sidewalk, but a designated bike path. They had a normal walk signal at an intersection, but I believe it was still acceptable to ride across as it was a bike-specific path. I could be wrong, though. Twist. She was talking to the goose. Story 18. Went to get my exhaust fixed. No big deal. A pothole poked a hole in it. When I went to pick up the car a couple hours later, I was treated to a woman screaming at the guy behind the counter. She's positively foaming because she's been waiting nearly 30 minutes for her car to be fixed. She even goes so far as to call the guy an insignificant, lazy immigrant. Guy looks at her, looks at me, throw me my keys. Here you go, your Magnum's ready. No charge. Look her directly in the eyes. Looks like it's going to be more expensive than we originally thought. Would you like us to call you a cab? I returned shortly afterwards with pizza for the shop. Too long didn't read? Disregard shrews? Get pizza. He's a hero, you're a hero. Fantastic. Story 19. Me and my friends were in line at a coffee place on a boardwalk after a day's surfing when the woman in front of me went freaking crazy and started screaming at the girl making the drinks something along the lines of, "You freaking ingrate! I'm fatally allergic to milk, you deity dang dong! I want to speak to your freaking manager before I rip your freaking head off." I specifically asked for soy milk. How could I be any more blunt about SOY? You could have freaking unalived me. She was told to stop swearing or they would call the police. And she denied her bad language and also stuck to her guns about demanding soy milk. I then stepped in and pointed out the fact that she didn't ask for soy, and I could prove it. She then proceeded to call me a big man with a small brain and asked me to prove it. I then pointed to my buddy's GoPro I still had mounted on me after messing around on the boardwalk. I had the backpack screen so I could show them exactly what she said. Lo and behold, she was proven so very, very wrong and hastily steamed away. The girl thanked me and her manager gave us free coffee. Story 20. I work for parking services at a decent-sized university. I don't write tickets, I just man the front desk, answer questions, and enter permits and changes into our database. We get yelled and cussed at a lot, so it's nothing new, but this shrew comes in raising heck over some tickets she rightfully got. She was being so ignorant and rude about the whole situation, but I politely looked up her account to see if I could find any errors or anything that might help her. She is constantly abusing me the whole time I'm trying to see what I can do for her. Well, look here. These hundreds of dollars of tickets you're complaining about aren't being linked to your account for some reason. I didn't tell her this, but I do ask to see her last ticket so I can check if everything is right. Little does she know, with the info I got from the ticket, I transferred all of those tickets she got onto her account. If she would have been nice about the whole thing, she would have probably gotten away without ever having to pay those. Now she has a few $100 worth of tickets. Story 21. Some douchebag in a Humvee decided to park in a handicapped spot at a Kroger. I was young at the time and out riding with my dad, a repo man, in a repo truck. He towed the Humvee to a parking spot on the opposite side of the parking lot. We waited till the owner came out and looked around in disbelief. She thought someone stole her car. My dad drove up to her, rolled down the window and said, "Are you okay, miss?" Woman said, "My car was stolen." My dad replied, "Well, maybe you shouldn't have parked it in a handicapped spot," and drove off. I'm a caretaker for someone in a wheelchair. As someone who really needs those spaces, I really appreciate it when people realize how douchebaggery it is for healthy people to take them. So thank you. Story 22. I watched a lazy shopper park their grocery cart right behind another person's car instead of putting it in the cart return. I got out of my car, ran up and moved the cart and put it behind her car. I then ran off and watched her have to get back out of her car since she couldn't back out, and then finally proceed to put up her cart the right way. I felt like a champion of the people. I was at Walmart, and a lady got in her car, rolled down her window, and started throwing papers out. I walked up to her car and picked up the paper and put it under her windshield wiper and walked away as I was riddled with curses. Story 23. I volunteer at my university, safe walks and all that jazz. We're required to report suspicious and illegal activity. Witnessed a woman driving a Mercedes-Benz across a lawn to bypass the parking gate, tearing up the gorgeous lawn. Being an ex-landscaper and mad at some rich shrew being too cheap for parking, I'm not amused. So we reported it to the parking authority. They show up while the chick is still getting stuff out of her trunk, box her in, and start writing a ticket. She ended up driving away over a curb, peeling her bumper off in the process. Made me kind of happy inside. Story 24. Not me, but when I was working at a car dealership, we had a bunch of cars get their wheels stolen one night. A police officer was writing a report, and a lady came in screaming that the cop was blocking her from getting to the service drive-thru. She was screaming at the top of her lungs, creating a huge scene. The cop calmly walks out and moves his car, comes back in, and finishes his report. Then he walks back out and drives his car to the end of the street and parks. The lady comes out and gets in her car and leaves. He pulls her over for having her wipers on without her headlights on. Story 25. I work in a university computer lab. In all the lab rooms, we have it clearly posted. No food, no drinks. I've repeatedly told a particular group that is in the journalism program to at least clean up their mess in the lab room designated for their class only. They never do, and I end up cleaning the mess. The other night, I went to lock up that particular lab room, and they left a mess and Fox News running on the TV in there. Just went ahead and put a channel lock with a passcode on it the night before Election Day. Story 26. At the end of a long commute home after a hard week, I went to a Millie's cookie store just before closing time. As I walked up to the counter, not 5 feet from it, some guy ran behind me and tried to cut in front of me. The girl working there insisted I was first, thank you. Outraged at what the guy tried to do and noticing there were not many cookies left, I said, "Hi, I'll take absolutely everything you have." Cost me close to $60, but it was so worth it. Story 27. Reported a hit and run today. That's pretty rude, and I'm sure they won't enjoy the call from the police. I used to work at a gift shop in front of a parallel parking-only street. So many people are hitting the cars around them all the time. Almost all the time they pretended it didn't happen. So I would wait, go outside, write all the info down and what happened, and leave it under their wiper blades so they would know exactly what happened if there was even a tiny dent. Story 28. Trashy Jerry Springer guest-looking young lady at Toys R Us on Black Friday tried to cut in the massive 90-minute line and threw a fit when she was told to go to the end of the line. She yelled at the employees and threw her products into the face of the security guards as she was told to leave. I started a slow clap, to which she replied, shrieking, "Curse y'all!" I loved that the slow clap was all you had to do in this situation to make her day worse. Brilliant. Story 29. Guy got out of his car to express some road rage to me. I just got out of my truck, walked past him, pushed the lock button on his door, closed it, walked past him again, his mouth hanging open this time, got back in my truck and drove off. He seemed to be frozen with confusion. Nice, to the point, and total butthole thing to do. +1 for you. Story 30. When I was working an awful job in my younger days, a customer was upset that he had to wait in line like everyone else before being able to make his purchase. He actually said, "Do you know who I am? I own hotels." To which I replied, "Well, sir, I'm sorry, but this isn't Monopoly, this is Krispy Kreme." He was not pleased. Story 31. By watching their face after telling them, "May the rest of the day be as pleasant as you are." To manager, "He told me to have a day as pleasant as I am. I want him fired." Manager, "He was being polite." Customer, "No, he wasn't. I'm a butthole." Story 32. I work in customer service and have no shortage of butthole customers. I often find that a nice big smile and a "have a nice day" at the end of an insulting customer's rant makes them angrier than any insult I could have thrown back at them. Story 33. When people are rude to me in the drive-thru, I bend their straw so it gets a crack in it. So later on, about halfway through their drink, their straw stops working. Ha! Story 34. When people are rude to me at my fast food job, I practically overflow their cup with ice. I'm a little passive-aggressive.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.